Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Justin Palmer Show. Today's guest is my friend Ajay Rayasam. I call him the human encyclopedia. He has an incredible depth of knowledge, and every conversation that I have with him is interesting. We've talked for hundreds of hours throughout our friendship, and we went deep on some subjects today. We talked about the education system and how we both view it as parents. We talked about some of the challenges in corporate culture today that exist, and based on some of AJ's own experiences in some big technology firms. And we also talked about cave diving, which was just an incredible conversation. AJ has an expertise in cave diving, and he's used that to leverage his managing his anxiety through different components of life. And it's really just a beautiful thing. I hope you guys enjoy the show. We rocked it out. I really enjoy talking with AJ. He's going to be a regular on the show. Excuse me. Get ready.
It's the Justin Palmer Show. Here we go. Woo! Woo!
Let's go. Let's do this.
What's up, brother?
How you doing?
Good, dude. Just got back from Boise. Did you know about that?
I saw it on the gram. I didn't really understand what was happening.
We were it was a little smoky outside. So we just woke up one day and was like, let's go to Boise. So we just packed the car and started driving. It took about 9 hours. We stopped in some interesting places on the way up. And we had absolutely no plan, but when we got there, naturally you put it out there and you start reaching out to people, and then the calendar is completely booked for like 3 days straight.
I saw you connected with Jimmy.
Oh, I did. Yeah, they're doing great. And obviously business is good. He's in an e-commerce space. So, and then we're up there and we liked it so much, just like being outside and being in Boise and just being on the road. And the car broke down, and we have a Honda Accord, which is a fantastic car. One of the rare manual transmission Honda Accords, which I do love. And it broke down. It had some kind of electrical issue. We had to take it into Honda. And then when it was there, and there's 5 of us, a couple of small kids and our au pair, me and Maggie, and we're driving and just kind of like being on the road so much, we thought maybe we should get a bigger car. So we just, while it was there at Honda, we just went car shopping. And the first thing we went across the street was Mercedes. So we looked at Mercedes Sprinters, and they didn't have a passenger one. If they had a passenger one, we would have just fucking left the Honda and bought that thing and drove it back. But they only had cargo vans, which like the flat panel with no windows and only the front seats.
Yeah, you can't buy that shit.
Yeah, so we couldn't take that and bring it home. So so we figured, and then the car kind of like magically fixed itself. And so we ended up driving it back. But now after doing more research, we're still debating on whether the Sprinter thing is the right idea, because I think we're going to be on the road a lot more in the future.
Yeah.
And you guys have thought about this too, right? Like going straight van style?
Yeah. Yeah. So you planted a seed, man. You planted like a deadly seed that has absorbed my mind, which was the Sprinter van with 5. We're 5 of us. So there's a Sprinter van is just, it would work for a weekend. But after thinking about it, I can't take 3 young kids on the road with a Sprinter. So I started looking at overland expedition vehicles based on that link that you sent me. Mm-hmm. And my Uncle Matt, he lived in a bus for, I think, probably 15 years. He was like an OG schoolie. So I reached out to him just to ask him some questions, and he called me back and he was like, hey, let's just build this fucking thing ourselves. Like, you can ship it to my house in Arizona and you guys come here and we'll build it out. And then it's just a full on custom overland truck.
Yeah. So, if you look on vanlifetrader.com or whatever, it's some Instagram site. I looked at vans. They have a bunch of stuff on there.
Yeah.
And a panel Sprinter with nothing in it or even one with windows with nothing in it that's just bare metal. I mean, those things can be fairly inexpensive, like 30,000 or less.
Yeah.
And which is fairly inexpensive for a car these days, considering you can go down to Chevrolet and get a pickup truck that's $90,000. So so the Sprinter can be fairly inexpensive. And then you see the van life trader ones that are built out. Somebody built out and put furniture and fixtures in it already. They're reaching well over $100,000.
Oh, easily.
So to me, what that says is there is a ton of value in doing it yourself, because who the hell wants to pay $50,000 to renovate, 25 square feet?
Yeah.
And
by the way, that's cheap. I got a quote from one of the top companies that's been doing this. They've done it 80 times now. And just the build out quote for a family of 5 with off-grid infrastructure it was $120,000 with labor.
This sounds insane to me. I'm pretty sure you can get everything you need to outfit a Sprinter on Amazon and just get your solar power, and you can get all of your tanks, and you can get your furniture and fixtures by just getting raw wood and cutting it and making what kind of interior you want. And then you mat insulate the interior, right? And you can either put up like wood plank or laminate or fabric or whatever you want to do on the inside. And that's it. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. And the ones that are on Van Life Trade, there's a bunch of YouTube channels on this. The people that have done this with basic handyman skills and hand tools can outfit a panel van to look pretty homey, with budgets that are like $10,000, $15,000 budgets on a van that's $30,000 or $40,000, and then somehow magically the market value of that thing is $100,000. Right. So there's like a ton of value in doing it yourself. If there's space, like we don't have a place here in California where we can park a 25-foot van for 3 months while we do that. So that's that's kind of what
Uncle Matt's.
Yeah.
He's got a compound.
Yeah, well, that's the next move, right? Is to actually get a place that's got the space to be able to do it. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg ordeal there. So do we get the van?
I think it becomes less relevant where you live then too. You know what
do
I
you
mean?
mean?
Like if you, do you need to live if you're on the road 9 months of the year or 8 months of the year, does it matter where you actually live? I mean, you can pick whatever place you want. You can pick Boise. You can pick a more affordable, quiet place,
right,
where you have the space to park this thing. You're at home. You have the space for the kids to kind of roam around and all that stuff. You don't need to live in like some city.
For sure. Yeah, and that's kind of the plan. But it's just the consideration of Sprinter first or place first. Because right now our place doesn't support a Sprinter. We could get the van and figure out where to park it, or we could get the land and then follow it up with whatever the hell we want. So we actually been looking at land too, up in your neck of the woods, probably going to be Washington State. Mm-hmm. I took a look at Boise, and I know people are digging Boise right now. And maybe it's because of the shutdown that we didn't really get the full effect of the energy that's in Boise. Because frankly, even though it's fairly open, like playgrounds are open and you can go dine inside of a restaurant and all of that stuff, very different than California. It wasn't something in how open it was in comparison to California.
Yeah. You mean open from a COVID perspective?
Yeah, that's right. Open from a COVID standpoint. It is, what it is? It's Austin in 1992. So much that it's got a river running through it and a Capitol building and a Capitol Avenue that's like their main downtown area and a little entertainment district. It's cute. I'm not even sure it's in fact the scale of Austin in 1992, because at that time the University of Texas was a giant employer, and BSU is a big employer there, but the city I still think is fairly small. There's I think a couple of issues and you hear these rumors of just like thousands of people moving to Boise. And they've certainly built the infrastructure out to assume that kind of influx. There's intersections in the suburbs that are 6 lanes wide that they've pre-built, anticipating 5,000 or 8,000 families to move into that area. So, and they've laid down all the groundwork, right? The banking is there, grocery stores, schools, like you lay that infrastructure down, and then come like all your commerce that starts with like mattress stores and car dealerships and all of that shit. And they build the highways 6 lanes wide to get, so there's no traffic whatsoever today, but they're expecting in 5 or 10 years that this is just going to become some kind of like mecca that people are just going to arrive to. I'm not sure I'm buying that for a couple of reasons. In one, their airport is a joke. So, I mean, you literally cannot get anywhere. And that's kind of a problem. People are still going to fly. Eventually, they're going to get back on a plane and need to go places. And it's almost like being in Hawaii. You can drive 4 hours in any direction and not get to another major city. And you have like 3 or 4 potential major hubs that you can fly into from Boise Airport. It is basically landlocked. And, and sure, the prices are good for real estate, but not for groceries, because you still have to transport, just like in Hawaii. You have to transport that stuff there somehow. And housing is good, but to get a reasonable place, you're still in it for 500, 600, 700,000. So it's not like, you're not moving to Reno or something where you get a $150,000 place. So outdoor life is great. Weather is good. People are super nice, infectiously nice. And it puts you in a great mood by doing that, I
think that's important.
It is. I think quality of life is fantastic out there. But I think if you don't have family out there, you don't have a bunch of friends out there, and you don't have an independent business out there, or if you're in a business that requires you to travel to some degree, it's going to be a little painful. So, but I think that everybody is buying the hype of Boise today because their real estate growth has just been explosive. So we may have to go back when it all opens up to kind of check it out. But it's I think the main issue with us being in a city like Boise is it's 8 or 9 hours to Seattle. It's 8 or 9 hours to the Bay Area. It's even further to Chicago. I mean, it is hard to get anywhere.
You wait on a flight?
In a car, but I mean, if you're flying, they have direct flights to the Bay Area.
I mean, a Seattle flight is like an hour or something.
Yeah, I think they have a Seattle flight, but outside of that, if you're trying to fly, to even a secondary city, it's just not likely. I think that you can go to the Seattle, the Bay Area, Denver, or Houston or Dallas, and that's pretty much it. I don't think you can fly anywhere else from Boise direct. So,
but is that need to fly somewhere else? Because I thought about all that stuff when we were moving out here to Hawaii, and there is plenty of direct flights to the mainland, but it's like once a day. I'm coming from New York. I'm used to deciding to go to San Francisco at like 10 a.m. and I can be on a flight by 3 p.m. at JFK.
Right.
Or 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. or even the 10 p.m.
Yeah.
So I went through that process too. And then I realized, do I even need that type of access to travel? Or can I design my life in a way where I don't necessarily even need that? Yeah.
So I think it's, this is one of those things where behavior follows environment. I think that that's true on so many levels. If you live in a city like New York and you have access to all of these types of flights, I mean, there were times that we were even when we were in Austin or even here in San Francisco, you get like notifications. There's a time I was in San Francisco and I got a notification of a $350 ticket to Shanghai. And I was like single at the time. And I was like, all right, fuck it, let's go. And I think that when you're in a city that has that kind of access, you get into the mindset of just having the freedom of being able to do that. I think that when you're in a city that's locked in, like in either an island or whatnot, sure, you can design your life to be contained like that. But And anybody can, but I think we want to be on the road a little more. We want to check things out. We want to continue to travel. And so you kind of want to put yourself in an environment where that's possible, because if you don't, and you put resistance in, in the environment for you to get that outcome, then you're naturally going to default against it. You know what I mean? Because even if you're in Boise and you say, hey, I got some friends that I haven't seen in Southern California in a long time in San Diego, but we have to go to LA and then connect from LA to John Wayne. And, even though it's on the same coast, that's going to be an 18-hour or 12-hour journey or whatever, with a connection and all of that and baggage check and dragging the whole family with us. So it just creates resistance, right? And as a result, you default, or you put it off, or you just say, hey, I'll do it next time, or you just don't go. And so that's kind of the concern, is that you get into that situation, and because it's difficult, you make less, you do it less. And so yeah, but you can do it that way. You can design your life to do whatever you want. But I think that if you're in New York and you're bopping around, and you got access to those kinds of flights, and you have a long weekend coming up, like Labor Day is coming up, and you don't have anything to do, and you get a notification that says, hey, tickets are $279 to London, you can just be like, okay, well, let's go. And there's no way that you can do that from some of these smaller airports. And and I know it sounds exotic, we do it every once in a while, to where we get those kinds of things. I mean, we just jumped in the car and rolled over to Boise. We just went to Seattle earlier this month and kind of did the same thing. You just see these specials where we did that when we were in Hawaii about a year ago. We just saw a special roll through on our inbox and pulled the trigger and bounced. And we really don't try to plan vacations like that. We just kind of go spontaneously and let the chips fall where they may. But the environment has to really support that. If it doesn't, I think that we would just kind of be the people that just sit at home. But I think that if you're the kind of guy that like really makes the effort, really wants to travel no matter what, you can make it happen no matter what. I think that we would be, we and a lot of other people, I think that if you were in that scenario and it's a real pain in the ass, then you're like, fuck it, we'll just do it later. And then you end up never doing it,
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I'm in a different place, because as I've been out here, and being out here has given me the space. I mean, coming from New York City, we were on one of the last flights out before the city entirely shut down. Literally the day before the city shut down for COVID, we were gone. It was like it's surreal to think about it, and taking the space to just think about what we want. I mean, I'm experiencing Hawaii and Hawaii's a beautiful place no matter what. When everything is shut down, it has the same challenges as everywhere else. You can get arrested or get a ticket for being on the beach right now. You can get a ticket or get your car towed for going up hiking right now. So I don't want to take that risk with 3 young kids with me.
Yeah. If
it was just me, I would go. But with the young kids, I can't go on a 2-hour hike and come back and my car's towed. And so it's forcing those conversations with Anna of like, what type of lifestyle do we want? What do we want the kids to experience? And with the overland expedition vehicle, what I see, we're going vehicle first. We're not even going to worry about house or land. We're going to build the truck, use my uncle's in Phoenix as home base for a few months while we build it out custom. And then we're going to hit the road. And we're going to take the school for the kids is going to be national parks, every major national park in the country.
Yeah.
And design that structure where we're their teachers. That becomes the lifestyle. And if we find a place that we like and we love, and we really love the community and the people, then, put a pin in the map and come back to it.
Right. Yeah, I like that idea too. And your kids are well, not really, right? We got 2 kids that are about the same age as y'all's. And I think that home base is important for us on some level. We have such a dense family in the Seattle area. having that home base, I think, is important to come back to, and then have some structure and have some community and whatnot, and that be largely family based. I think that's important, even if you spend months at a time on the road. So I think we're going to try to pull both off somehow. I just haven't figured out the order. I like the idea of just pulling the trigger on this van. Maggie hasn't bought in. How did you convince Anna to just jump the shark and just go with the?
It was a process. When I first brought it up, she literally looked at me and was like, "What the fuck?" She was her mind went immediately to, we just got to Hawaii and now you want to hit the road. And I just let her process it. And
that's fair.
Max, totally. I get it. Look, I get it. What I started outlining was it ties into kind of what we're experiencing. Some of this is probably a reaction to just COVID life, where the kids aren't built to be on an iPad for 4 or 5 hours a day. They're just not.
Right.
They come off of it and they're like zombies, and as I'm seeing them transition off it, and they literally come out and they're like, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to go outside. I was like, there's got to be a better way to teach them about the world. And I'm on my own journey right now too. I'm deconstructing a lot of conditioning that was built in just by me experiencing society. And actually one of the big inspirations was Sailing Zatara. Shout out to Sailing Zatara that you recommended.
Awesome channel, huh? That family
incredible YouTube channel. YouTube channel. And I had the family watch it all together, just from the context of seeing what it's like to go off grid. And like the first episode we watched is them crossing the Atlantic in like 19 days. Mm-hmm. And they're kind of like going crazy. But what's really interesting about it is the kids are like entertaining themselves. They're using their creativity to find something to do. And I think there's just something inside me says there's incredible value in that. And so I just started painting a picture of like, look, we can build the truck. When I told her we were going to build the truck, she was like, you can't fucking build the truck. We were going to get this like nice thing. I was like, yeah, that nice thing is $300,000 for a box. Uncle Matt and I can build it for 30. And so it's just been a process. And I think what she's come around to most is that the experience, our kids are at that age where they don't need as much structure, right? 8, 5, and baby, 1.5 years. And this is a window in our lives where we can take them around and make every day an adventure. And if we have that window of opportunity, why would we not take that?
How did we get to this point where like 100 years of forcing kids to sit in classrooms for 8, 9, 10 hours a day, and then when they don't want to do that we medicate them to do it, and then claim that there's some kind of a hyperactivity problem in boys who are 7. I think that's supposed to be the case, but it's just such an odd thing. And now I think it's going the other direction. Instead of kind of promoting kids to get outside more and to be more interactive with the environment, there was this whole movement about getting kids into the classroom, and there's some legacy rumors that this was a whole construct about creating compliance for factory workers and teaching that into kids at an early age, and that's the foundation of the American school system. There's that whole theory. But now with COVID, and now that everybody is at home, it's arguably worse, because now they're just glued to the TV screen, and that is a much stronger dopamine hit than like sitting in a classroom. So that kind of hooks them onto this screen time. And then in the downtime, they just immediately replace that with like Fortnite or Minecraft or whatever the thing is today. Roblox is another thing I just heard about.
Anything.
I think video games are going to be banned at our house, by the way. I don't see a single realistic, return on that investment of time. Not that I guess there has to be, but it is just a complete waste of time. It's like watching soap operas or like daytime TV. It is the most garbage use of time ever in my mind is playing video games. And kids are just burning hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars on this stuff. And I see absolutely no benefit. I feel like if video games just ended overnight, then literally no one would give a fuck. And this happened once already. This happened to comic books at one point. Comic books were massive in the 80s. And then all of a sudden in the 90s, nobody gave a fuck at all. And only recently, because of the advent of like the comic book media crossover, did people start to care about that. And that's really just because people can collect like mixed media across comic and movie, and they have these sort of augmented universes with entire comic book stories. Prior to that, when it was just flipping through pages in a comic book, kids, like when we grew up in the 80s, loved them. And then in the 90s, no one cared. And it could be, I feel like video games could be one of those things, which it's just like at one point, it just falls off the map and no one gives a fuck anymore. Because I don't understand. I've never played a video game. I don't understand the value. Maybe I'm going off on the deep end and I'm in the minority on this one. But like, I just personally have no interest and see no value in video games whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, look, I played video games a little bit when I was a kid, but I always was one system behind because we didn't really have that much money. So when the new Nintendo came out, I would be on the OG Nintendo. And so I never really got that into them because of that. It just wasn't new and bright and shiny for me, I guess, when I was a kid.
Yeah, right.
But I agree with you. This is, and I think the screen time, I mean, this summer I took the kids had an iPad each for quiet entertainment in the morning sometimes. And the more they use the iPad every day, my son would just walk out in the morning like a zombie. He would walk out and be like, where's the iPad? And I'm like, this has got to go. We have to just put it away. And it was resistance for about 4 or 5 days. Mm-hmm. And then I started explaining to him, when you wake up like that, you're not even tapping into your conscious mind. Just tap into it, right? Take a look around at the universe. Be
right.
thankful. That's it. It's that simple. Like there's really, when you go do the work, there's really no secrets in life other than being present in the moment and being grateful. That's it. It's that simple. If you can connect with those two things, you can change your entire experience of life. And I feel that the technology integration, and even the school system, by the way, I think it just kind of beats kids into conformance. And that's one path. That's one way to go. There's many other avenues to take to educate your children. My wife's sister has been homeschooling her kids in New York City. They live in New York City and she homeschools them. And her daughter speaks 4 languages. She's been reading since she was like 2.5 or 3. Literally, I mean, the kid is a straight up genius. She's just like, she processes books at an unbelievable rate. And it's because they didn't put any limits around like, oh, you're in 3rd grade. Only drip them this bit of knowledge. Every kid learns at a different rate and they all kind of level out at some point. But if you allow their mind to just expand infinitely, I feel that they grow at a tremendous level and they just understand the world. And I think we've lost this connection to the natural world in so many ways. And part of what I'm designing is, let's go immerse in that natural world to really reconnect with it. And what's it like to be on the road for a year with no agenda? For them,
yeah,
for me, for my wife, all of it. There's something really, really powerful in that.
I see a lot of benefits. To that. And I think a lot of people are going to see the benefits of that kind of a lifestyle too, to where based on COVID, based on schools being the number one transmission vector for these kinds of viruses, based on having a more well-rounded and holistic upbringing and education that I think people are going to start really asking the question of, hey, should we be rethinking this traditional school thing? And I'm not sure what it'll eventually look like, but I'm willing to bet that it's going to be some kind of a hybrid system that tries to accomplish all of those things. That has some digital component, that has some that has some in-classroom community component, that has some outdoor thing, and I'm a big fan of decentralization, to where models that function really efficiently in a single location go through a cycle, because there's an economy of scale by doing it at mass in a monolithic model, and eventually that gets decentralized. And I'll give you a good example. Energy is going through this decentralization today, where right over the past several decades, energy creation has been consolidated into the power plant, because producing at scale creates an economy. And that economy, of course, power degrades the longer that you transfer it over the wire, right? That's just Ohm's law. So if you're to transfer electricity over the wire and you lose some of the charge across distance, that's offset by the economy of scale that you get by producing at a central power plant. So that's the basic logic of why power is produced in mass in these monolithic power plants. What's decentralizing this now is solar. So now what you do is you take the energy production and you put it at the edge, which is where it's being used. So if I take solar and I put it at my house, that means that now I don't have to create energy at the central location. I'm creating energy on the edge of the entire infrastructure. And the energy infrastructure is kind of clear because it literally is an infrastructure. But I think that decentralization will happen in several other areas. I think it's happening in compute, for example. That is, a lot of compute used to exist in data centers today, and now there's extremely large decentralized compute machinery in the form of blockchain, and Tesla, for example, are large decentralized data centers effectively. And I think it's going to happen in manufacturing, right? Where now things are largely made in monolithic models overseas because there's a massive economy to that. And that offsets the cost of transportation to the edge, which is like across the boat and, using delivery vehicles to get it to the end user. And I think it's going to happen. It could potentially happen again in education, right? Where people now go to schools, thousands of kids in some cases, into these large schools. They're all trying to reach some aggregate metric of educational outcome that the policy has dictated what the curriculum should be, and blah, 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 and turn into these decentralized micro communities of people that have 5, 10, 15 students at a time that collect together, and they do a lot of different interesting things. And there are those pods of decentralized education systems that exist today. You'll see them in wealthy neighborhoods today, where like a group of 10 or 15 families will come together. A lot of those guys have staff, nanny staff, private staff that have master's degrees and shit like that, and that they'll all get together at somebody's house a couple of times a week, and they'll go over some of that curriculum, and they're accelerating way faster than you would in a traditional school system. But those are the privileged few that have access to that. But I think that there's a way to scale that across everybody and just make it more effective in general. And then there's a digital augmentation component to where, because the digital part eventually will be 5,000 kids, 10,000, 50,000 kids logging in at once into getting some standardized input. The only thing that's missing, that's the unsolved in this, arguably the most important part of traditional school system in my mind, is competitive athletics. I don't know how that fits into this yet. If you could figure out how that fits into it, I'd be willing to bet that education will be the next model, this next monolithic model that becomes decentralized, because from right now the government has a heavy hand in how you decide to raise your kids from an education standpoint, and all the way from truancy, some of those bizarre truancy laws that used to exist, to certain standardized testing and standard measurements of what it means to, have some basic education. Like all of that is a little odd. And a lot of that is all for college prep, which now we live in the world where like, is college even going to fucking exist in 20 years?
I've been saying that for since my kids were born. I don't think they're gonna. I think they're gonna have a clear choice to not go to school and not impact the quality of their lives. Not go to college.
Yeah, even in college, like colleges are starting to get the memo on this, and that they've got to really revamp their curriculum to even continue to get people to want to go. And I've always said that if I went to University of Texas in Austin, if that had not happened, or if I could redo it, I wish I would have gone to culinary school, because at the end of the day, if you go to culinary school, and I used to know the CEO of a startup in Austin. He actually had a startup. He raised money. He sold that startup and and I met him on his second startup that was funded by Chicago Ventures. He didn't go to college. He went to culinary school. And what you end up doing is you pick up a skill that you can translate to any country in the world, have a job in any economy in the world, and have a skill that you use every single day for the rest of your life. That's something that brings like joy and happiness to others in the form of being able to cook and provide something to eat. And why would you not want to have that skill? Because very few people, I think, today can really cook effectively for themselves or others. So if I didn't go to college, I think Culinary Academy would be a win. But even if that wasn't the case, there's so many options, all the way from different trade schools like metalworking and woodworking that are now relevant even to where like building vans or whatnot, like we were just talking about, to other professional programs where you like now software programs and software coding programs are like 9-month hardcore boot camp classes that you can plow through and exit with $150,000 a year job. Like, why the fuck would you go to college if that exists? So, college is still required because, if you're in medicine or law, in most states law, I think you can go to Wisconsin and you don't even have to pass the bar to be a lawyer.
How's that fucking possible?
Yeah, you don't. There's certain states where you don't have to go to law school to be a lawyer.
I don't know about that.
I think some states you don't have to go, but if you pass the bar, you can be a lawyer. And I think there's at least one state, and I think it's Wisconsin, where you don't even have to do that, where I think that you can just be a lawyer if you want. But there's not enough people, to just go up there and be like, I'm a lawyer. Good luck getting clients, right? But yeah, I think education is going to be the next thing that really gets reinvented in our lifetime. Not just higher education, but all the way down to like the elementary school level. Some of that's going to be powered by guys like you that just to say, fuck it, I can do this better on my own.
Yeah, well, and it's not even. Look, I appreciate the teachers. I think they have similar to police. I think they have a hard job, right? Connecting with everyone's kids and understanding 20 different kids on a daily basis and what they're experiencing and what they're going through. It's kind of an impossible job in a lot of ways. And so you have to teach these kids to just conform. That's it, right? You have to teach them to just stay in the boundaries. And what I'm realizing, especially with my son, is, and all the kids, they get the most value by doing something with me. Even if it's washing the car, it's teaching them to wash the car. Like, hey, we gotta scrub in between the spokes on the wheels, because if you don't, there's just dirt build up there and then that part's not going to look clean. That's a really basic thing. But what I'm teaching them is just attention to detail. Pay attention to what is right in front of you in the moment. And that transfers to everything else that they're doing. And I just think there's some element that's missing. For my kids, I want to be that guide. Right? I want to be that guide for them that says, I'm going to pass on the best things about life that I possibly can. And I think this is generally what's missing in society, is that we in America, at least, we're saying outsource everything. Just anything I can outsource. Clean your house, outsource. It's not worth it. Doing the dishes, watching your kids, outsource it. And we're focused on economic productivity. And I've been questioning, is that even value? We're outsourcing, raising our children, the next phase of consciousness in the universe, so that we can go make money. A piece of paper. I mean, when you look at it like that, am I fucking crazy? That sounds insane to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. Being intelligent or being smart is a self-reinforcing thing by that piece of paper. So what happens is that you invest all your time and energy and effort into getting that piece of paper. And so the people who do that create the mechanism that says, this is what smart is, because I made the investment. Now I have the piece of paper. And because I made the investment, I need to justify to myself that I put all that time in. So I get to define the standard of what smart is now. And so now that just kind of got adopted by the rest of the society. I think it got adopted because generally those people who do have those pieces of paper end up in better life outcomes, right? So, but there's a lot of reasoning for why that's the case. But now we live in a day where I'm not really sure that having that piece of paper is going to produce a better outcome. Traditionally, I think that piece of paper produces a better outcome because the people who are only capable of getting that piece of paper had a better shot of succeeding anyway. Know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, but now you can say that, hey, without it, I can be just as successful as somebody who got it. And so, but there's going to be resistance from like the powers that be that say, hey, if you don't have that piece of paper, you're not smart, because I put the time and effort and energy into it. And so therefore it gives me like the pedestal of which to stand and judge others who didn't do it and being inadequate. Right. Until that system gets broken, people don't get like a real fair opportunity to judge whether college is right for them or not. So, because right now I think that there's a lot of pressure to go to college, because otherwise I'm not going to be viewed as a viable candidate or smart enough or whatever. And that's true, because the other people who did get it are the ones that are pointing the finger.
Right.
But the thing is that the people there's going to be a bold few who decide not to go and end up successful anyway. And those are the people that are going to go out there and say, hey, you know what? College is fucking stupid. And there's a lot of those guys, right? There used to be a lot of them that rose to enormous power, like, you know, Bill Gates and Zuckerberg. Neither of them finished college. But I think that there's going to be a lot of young entrepreneurs, successful people that ended up either doing trade, short-term college, dropped out of college, didn't go at all. And it did not play a significant part into their outcome, you know?
Yeah. And I've been thinking about this a lot in the context of, I dropped out of high school, and the primary reason why I went to college is because I went from job to job trying to move up, trying to grow. And people literally told me, you're not ever going to be in the sales department. You can't, you have a GED. You didn't even finish high school. You don't have a college degree. I mean, at multiple jobs, I was told this. And my reaction was, I have to go do this to get myself back on level ground. Right. And so for someone, to be a high school dropout and go from working in an auto body shop in a warehouse, unloading trucks, to moving to New York City, going to school for 3 more years. And then my first job out of college is working at a real estate private equity fund. It was the strangest, bizarro experience you could possibly imagine. Like I remember the first week of sitting down at the desk and being like, whoa, okay. I changed the trajectory in my life through this process. And I still don't think that I got that much out of college. I had some incredible teachers, and I definitely learned some valuable life lessons. I also had a completely different experience going into college. And I was telling that, I can't remember, I was talking to someone else because originally I was going to study business, and I went in to take the business classes, and they're teaching you to memorize terms about business. And I was looking around going, I'm not learning anything. And so I switched my major to history, where thankfully there was only like 10 people in the history department at the college that I went to. And so the professors, they just invested a ton of time in me, and they were like, you need to learn how to think. You need to process information. History is this thing of a bunch of different sources, and you have to decide which is most credible. And there's no right answer. And that was a really valuable learning lesson. I don't think I needed to spend 4 years to get that lesson. And so I think a big part of it is, and I'm trying to process this while I'm writing my book right now, which is, I think the reason why the statistics on people that drop out of high school are so bad, like the life is against you statistically if you drop out of high school. From a life expectancy, from health, from income, from chances of suicide. They're all infinitely higher when you drop out of high school. And I think a big part of that is because people tell you you're never going to be good enough. You're never going to make it. Instead of sending a message of like, hey, that learning model wasn't great for you. I dropped out of high school primarily because I was just fucking bored. I was really bored. And I didn't want to sit in class and read books. It just wasn't the way that I learned at that point in time. And I think if we tell people a different message, or if there's more flexibility in the educational curriculum, we may end up in a place where more people are happy and more people are fulfilled. It just seems to me that I agree with you. Like, this goes back to the model of education that exists today needs to be updated.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I don't think anybody is in love with, the way that broad education happens in the United States, at least. And other countries have gotten really progressive with some of this stuff. But it's going to be interesting to see how we, advance out of this, because colleges have this massive foothold. There's all this debt hanging out there. It's the next great bubble, like there's what they're calling it, this the student loan debt. And I can't, with a good conscience, like, recommend to anybody that college is the right answer, when that was probably easily something I would have recommended 15 years ago. Says you have to go to college. At the very least, go to college, if not get an advanced degree. Today, I'm not even sure in good conscience I would tell anybody that that's the right move. So it's it's a bizarre time that we're in, to think that some of these major institutions, colleges, literally just might not survive. And that there's, they're talking about like something like in the next 20 years that a third of all colleges could shut down.
Wow.
Yeah. So, that has yet to be seen, but I wouldn't be surprised, just for the exact statement that you just mentioned, that out of that college experience, what of value did you really take from that? And I'm thinking back on the 4 years that I spent at college. I can safely say that the number one thing that I think about when I think about college is feeling guilty for having blown so much of my dad's money over something that I'm not sure I did anything, where I could have just as easily, this was in the .com boom, right? I could have gone into any dipshit little startup. It would have tanked, but I would have gotten a totally different experience, just like you did at Lehman Brothers, like seeing the rise and the fall and blown to 300 employees and then bankrupt in the next couple of months. That whole being inside the walls of a company in that experience would have given me a whole different take on life. And meanwhile, I was just like partying and drinking and discovering, how to convince my way to to get into bars underage and figuring out how to flirt with girls and shit like that. That's pretty much all I did. And work out.
Also valuable.
Yeah, but I mean,
you could do that anywhere.
But paying some institution for that lesson, I'm not sure. So, because all those things would have remained with or without the school. So, but yeah, that's, I guess I get to say that I went to college, and that, I'm sure that has played as an advantage over the course of my career. And you're right, man. People get judgy with that stuff. And mostly people judge themselves, I found. The people that don't have degrees, that later in life, when they get into their 40s and 50s, and even if they end up successful, they feel insecure about not having a degree. And that's a little sad, right? That they've just been so beat over the head about how significant getting a degree is, that even after they get all the things that they want, that they still look at themselves as inadequate, because the system is so rigged to make you think that a degree is of some great social value.
Yeah. Well, I think people, I think people need to invest more in themselves, right? It's like the theory of fix yourself first, right? You can't be a good parent if you haven't done the work on yourself. You can't be a good manager, leader, coworker, whatever, unless, and I'm not saying we kind of went far on the pendulum of like, hey, fuck schools, get rid of schools.
Yeah.
But I do see that I think there's going to be there's a middle ground, right? There's a middle, because some kids may be ready and may need that experience to kind of wean off of living at their parents' house. I think in Europe, and don't quote me on this, don't quote me on anything ever. This is just a conversation.
I'm writing it down right now so I can literally quote you in my book.
I mean, I have some friends that are European, and their model of like, they go to school after they've traveled.
So what you're saying is that you hate black people.
Please.
I have friends that are European. I got it. That is code. That is in 2020. That is code for I hate black people.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm just going to say whatever the fuck I want, and people can like it or not. That is, for the record, that is inaccurate. I feel like I have to say that now. Dude, but sorry for interrupting. Keep going. No, my point is the European model of life of, you go to school after you've lived a little bit, after maybe you had a couple of jobs. That seems more real. Like, let your brain fully fucking develop, right? Let your frontal cortex form, and then decide what you want to do. I think we've created this pressure on people to say, all right, you're done with high school. What are you doing next? What are you doing next? And now all people do is focus on what's the next thing. What's if you're a mouse in a cage, you're just going back and getting the feed, right? You're just going back and getting the feed. You're like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? Instead of understanding, like, maybe it's okay to go spend 6 months doing nothing, traveling. I mean, it's not that you're doing nothing. You're traveling around and just experiencing the world. Maybe it's okay to spend 2 years experiencing the world and figuring out how you want to live.
Yep. Yeah. And that goes back to like, working on yourself. But this ties into something that you mentioned when you were working about like they would look at the fact that you had a GED and they would just tell you that it's not even possible for you to get this job or that job. How did that go? Because I've got a lot invested into what I think is probably the most toxic time for corporate culture in a long time. It is an extremely toxic, environment out there for corporate culture. It's bizarre because and I think that it's partly because corporations are so unilaterally fixated on producing economic advantages for their shareholders that the employees just get completely compromised in this. So I have some theories about that, but and it ties back to this and I'm gonna go in a little bit of a controversial stance on this, but it's something that I think is the case.
Hey, can you not click that pen while you go into this? Sorry,
yeah, it's helping me think, because because what it is that the desire, because in that situation where they're like, hey, look, you don't have a degree, you can't be a salesperson. The access to higher education, or even the access to getting a fundamental education that gives you the likelihood of getting accepted into a college, is hugely racially split in the United States. So the later framework that in a company that says that, hey, we're going to value this degree regardless of what your aptitude actually is or what your skills actually are, that we're going to value this degree all other, is there within that mechanism is buried a racial bias. And it's from the secondary mechanism of that, racial minorities have just less access to, the educational systems and tools and higher education systems in the United States, and then later employers insist on having that education in place. It's basically an entitled culture, self-perpetuating model. So, and I think that what that does is it breeds this homogeny in these corporate cultures that that very clearly defines a group of haves and have-nots, and it is that group of haves and have-nots, and they both look very specific. Right? There's a group of haves that look, if you take any company that is more than 20 years old, it is, 50 plus year old silver haired white guys with like a minority or two trickled into their SVP ladder out of there's just sheer acknowledging that they need to be a little bit more diverse
and beating someone into conformance.
What's that?
And like just forcing someone into conformance. I think your point is right, and I also think there's another element, which is they find the people that are willing to be consistent all the time in towing the line.
Right. Yeah. And that adds to the toxicity, right? So the corporate culture in a lot of these places are just they're not, a lot of these companies are just odd places to work, in that sense that that everybody is very clearly has very clearly realized that they're completely inconsequential, and that they go that they have really not aligned themselves ethically with their company, and that now pay is sort of a component of your of being compliant in that model. So, and that I would like to see a day where, and this is kind of going into a lot of the content that's going to be in a book that I'm releasing this year. That's going to be about employees demanding more from their employers, and because nobody seems to be asking questions when they look for jobs like, does the company that I'm working for meet my ethical standards? And I get it that a lot of people don't have the luxury of being able to ask those questions, but for those who do, I think that people examine jobs far less on things like they examine much more, hey, do I like this manager? Do I like the job, the actual details and tasks of the job? And is the pay adequate? Instead of looking at things like, am I in line with the company's ethical standard? Do I think that the company treats fringe, minority, and disenfranchised groups equally? Or have equal opportunity for growth and expansion for those groups, and then do I feel like my company takes responsibility for individual employees' health and safety? Nobody asks those questions about their employer, and because the reality is that if you were to ask those questions to employees today, the vast majority of them would say that my company doesn't give a fuck about any of those things. And that is a pure tragedy in American capitalism today, is that we design companies for this growth system only. They achieve these massive sums and create a handful of extremely rich individuals that are powered on the backs of hardworking Americans who are largely not connected to that goal at all, and are completely under the understanding that the company doesn't give two shits about them, and that not their health and safety, and that are completely bought into a system that promotes a specific racial class because of existing mechanisms that they're unwilling to override, and that's kind of a tragic outcome of a lot of these companies, and it prevents people who are capable and intelligent to be able to get into some of these places because they don't have the traditional backgrounds or the traditional education that are basically this part that are basically in, the basics of even getting through the screening process. Those guys are completely eliminated, and then it it just perpetuates this toxicity inside the walls. And then, of course, you have the people that are in the haves, that they continue to grow in their career, and then they get to this point of invincibility. And I've been in that position before. The power that you have in some of those is a drug, for sure. And you get into those situations and you start feeling a little bit invincible. That's when you start getting into, I think, a lot more of the subtle parts of corporate America that are kind of the dirty underbelly with the misogyny and kind of this weird kind of subjugation. That stuff happens,
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that is that, and I didn't tell anybody this, but I was at a company that went public back in 2008, and I was there for a number of years. During that era, I was there for a little over 7 years. During that era, 5 people that I personally worked with during that area have died of a drug overdose. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. I think it's a part of the culture that those kinds of situations manufacture. In some cases, necessary to get a company to that size, to go from 30 million to 3 billion or whatever that journey was. And it's a bit tragic because at the end of the day, while it was a fantastic company in many respects, one thing is certainly true, and that is the company really didn't have a mechanism to deal with that kind of a situation inside the walls. When I'm in the situation I'm specifically talking about is the long-term mental health of employees that are a part of it. I mean, in some of these companies, it is war, and I don't mean like war for the purpose of discrediting what actual war is like for those who are actual contributors to that to our defense system, but it's war in the sense of like those companies are in a cutthroat situation and competitive in the market, and they're kind of doing their thing, and people are under a high amount of pressure to perform. So I think that a lot of times really compromises people's overall livelihoods. In some cases, mental health. In some cases, physical health. There are very few systems in place that companies that address those kinds of things. It's arguably getting worse, to where people are in these making more money than they ever were before, but they feel more isolated than they ever were, especially because now of COVID. And anxiety and depression are at all times high, and a lot of times people do turn to medication and drugs and end up having issues because of that. And I think a lot of this is the failure of these companies to say that some of this is my responsibility. And so part of the book is try to encourage. I don't think it's going to go from the top down. I don't think you can go to a company and say, "Hey guys, you guys should start caring about this." Maybe if we could get, I think Mark Benioff, who I happened to meet a couple of times, solid dude. I think that he could do something like that at a Salesforce, and a couple of companies might follow suit. To really make it a system, I think it's got to be a ground up kind of thing. The employees have to demand it. And they have to demand, hey, look, if I'm going to come work here, I need you as an employer to make at least some effort on thinking about employee health and safety in a real meaningful way, particularly long-term mental health. I need you as an employee, as an employer, to demonstrate that those that are in that are in these secondary groups have an equal opportunity for growth and development as anyone else. And that includes getting into the company in the first place.
Sure.
And and I don't think that a lot of companies can address those questions today at all. Yeah, because if you look at engagement surveys today, and the way that engagement surveys and corporate culture surveys that are all run today, none of those talk about this stuff. None of them talk about what they're all concerned about is how long are you going to keep employees before they quit and turn on you. None of them are addressing that the employee side of it, which is when is it time for you to fire your employer because they don't meet your ethical standard on how you think a company should operate. And maybe this is like the utopia that we get to because I think people right now, I think are under the gun about being able to about even having a job, to where it might get some some lashback on the idea that how am I going to be able to demand anything from my employer when the paycheck itself is something that keeps food on the table. I agree that there's some delicacy that needs to be handled when it comes to that stuff, because not everybody is in a position of luxury to be able to say that, to say that. But I think that that it's high time that some of these employers take responsibility for how much they're taking from their employees. Yeah. So
I just want to interject for a second, because there is seeds of change coming in this direction. And the company that comes to mind is I did a leadership training program in New York with a company called Next Jump. And it's run by some friends of mine, Charlie and Megan, and they run it co-CEOs. And their entire process is, whether you are there to provide restocking of the food and beverage and clean the office, or you're a software engineer, or you're a frontline salesperson, you have to go do the work on yourself before you start your actual job. Which is, they have a program that they've designed that's kind of a combined version of Bridgewater and what Ray Dalio does, a little bit of Tony Robbins and some basic psychology stuff, and their own mix of things from their own experience in life. And so when they interview people, they don't have a 1 hour interview and then you meet the next person until you get higher up in the chain. They do like a something called I think they call it like a super Saturday. And you go for the entire day in all these different experiences, and they watch the person to see how they interact and see how they interact with other people and deal with stress in different situations. They're trying to figure out who this person is. Yeah. And so I think there are some seeds of that. I agree with you that there's certainly injustice in the world, for sure. Corporations it's like a giant tanker ship. These companies that are profitable, you're asking them to change the way that they do business. And I don't think the leadership at the top is prepared. They don't even want to take the risk of doing that, because if they erode margins by 5%, what happens to your stock price? And then and if you keep going down this path, it's like, well, then what happens to their net worth, because they have so many stock options? So the entire system is set up to incentivize them for one thing, which you mentioned, which was like keep share prices high, not do something valuable for society. And I think I really like what you're talking about in terms of your book. And I think it's critical, even taking a step back, to address those issues as an individual before you even start looking for a job. What type of companies would I want to work for? There's companies out there. Patagonia is known as like a highly ethical company that does incredible things. I mean, there's plenty of examples out there. The choices in the era that we kind of came of age in, it was a lot different. The internet wasn't as prevalent. There wasn't social media. And I think we have to, it's a delicate balance because we have to get away from this cancel culture of like, if someone does something wrong in their job, does it mean that they're a terrible manager or a terrible leader? Or does it mean that they just made a really bad decision and they need some time to reflect on that? And we have to have some level of life has to have a redeemability to it. Otherwise you're going to the extreme on the other end of like, this person made a terrible decision. They've got to go. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think that there's a lot to that. And that some of it is that those decisions are not vacuum chamber decisions. Those decisions and those bad ones, a lot of time that comes with the environment, you know. I think environment is such a big part in decision making and outcomes. I mean, this is starting to show true with people who are drug abusers. It's showing too for people who in the education system, right? If you change the environment, you really change the individual and the decisions that they make. So there's in some of this is the analogy of the power of a gun. You can be a completely benign and easygoing individual. If you take that individual and you put a gun in their hand, then pretty soon they'll think of some people that they want to shoot. So, and some of this has also been shown, Darren Brown, the mentalist from the UK, has like a really flamboyant way of demonstrating this with one of his first TV series called The Heist, where he took a group of random 10 people he had selected them, but they were randomly arranged school teachers and doctors and typical people like that. And he convinced half of them to go into a bank and rob it. And a lot of that was just putting them into the environment of normalizing that kind of behavior to where they made the decision themselves. So a lot of people can be convinced to do pretty crazy ass shit and make some pretty terrible decisions if the environment that they're in really supports that stuff. So I agree with you. I don't think that it's such a thing as a bad person, like some, there are, but I mean, I don't think you're right. The cancel culture is way too far on the edge of like, you make a bad decision and therefore you're a piece of shit forever. There is definitely some things that you can control within that. A lot of things you can control, and having self-mastery is of course a lifelong journey. But then there's also that, hey man, some people are just in an environment and the input of that environment, really fostered some terrible decision-making. It goes back to that whole rule of fifths, that you're the average of your closest 5 friends. And there is no way that most people can be put into certain environments, certain toxic environments, or certain high pressure environments, and not change themselves. So, this has been shown time and time again, and not just those frameworks, but also people who run into large sums of money, people who change social networks, people who move out of the country. They get into these different environments, or people, for large in part, the most famous, one of the more famous cases are people who, for relatively minor crimes, have gotten these extreme sentences, and they end up turning into criminals because they were in the jail system. So. Otherwise, people who had committed virtually no crime and got busted like in the 80s for like marijuana possession got sentenced to 20 years, and then they ended up becoming lifelong criminals after that. It's because the prison environment converted them into criminals. So So I'm a huge believer in that, I don't think that the corporate culture is any different. So I think that when you're in that, there's a lot of decisions that you end up making that you would not have made outside of that, because the environment really promotes that sort of train of thinking. So you're right. I don't think it's down to the individual, and I don't think it's right for us to say, "Hey, you're an idiot. Therefore, you should, you're gonna have to burn on the cross for these bad decisions that you made 14 years ago." But it's I can't remember where I was going with this, but
well, I would have been dead on the cross a long time ago, because I've made a ton of fucking mistakes, and I think
that's part of the journey. You kind of have to be allowed to make some mistakes. So because you can't really grow unless you make a bunch of mistakes, and and if we started to dig into everybody's past about like where they fucked things up, this is gonna be a bad time. So because everybody's gonna dig up something.
Nobody wants to see that movie.
Yeah.
Well, I think where I'm at on a personal level, I just finished reading The Untethered Soul for the second time.
Oh yeah,
have
good
you read
book.
that book? Yeah, you read it?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, so I read it about a year and a half ago, and rereading it, I just finished it last week. I felt like I hadn't even cracked the book open. It was like reading a new book again. And the biggest takeaway this time around was the past is the past. And the minute that it's gone, it doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is right now, this moment that's happening right in front of you. And that alone is one of the most powerful tools that you can leverage as a human being. There's nothing that shapes your past that should impact what you do right now, other than understanding more of what it is to be human in the experience of the moment. And I think that's a fantastic
lesson.
For sure.
That the past does not exist except for within our minds.
That's right.
And that the only power that the past has is the reference that we use as an example to inform our future, which is a mistake, because the past does not inform the future. So, and I think that's a fantastic lesson. Everybody should spend some time with that book, because that's a great part of that book, because a lot of times people do, I think, myself included, think about the past and get wound up in the past, and then use that experience of the past to then inform events in the future, or even make predictions about the future. And they're almost completely independent. Another thing about Boise, I was talking to Jimmy up there, and one of the first things they mentioned were like, okay, so when are we going to go to Hawaii and see Justin? I was like, man, I am ready to go. You tell me. We're thinking December. I don't know what the open schedule looks like down there.
Yeah, I don't know either. We're in Hawaii, just reverted back into a full lockdown a couple of days ago.
I heard that.
So I also just saw yesterday that Hawaiian Airlines is having massive layoffs, and they're expecting another round in September, including union workers. So I think there's going to be some short-term pain that comes out of it. Probably going to be some great deals to come out here.
Yeah.
But look, come out. It's nature. We can play on, as long as the beaches are open, we're good.
Sure. Yeah. Are you scuba certified?
I'm not.
Do you do any diving out there?
I have. We did a little bit of snorkeling on the North Shore with the kids, which was incredible to do. And it was incredible for them to see. There's an area called Sharks Cove, which is pretty shallow. Maybe the deepest part in the main area is maybe 8 or 10 feet. And it was awesome for the kids to see it, but I'm not. And that's one thing I wanted to talk to you about was your diving experience and what it's like to go deep underwater in caves and shit.
Yeah, that stuff is I got really into that for a while, and then the last time I was in the cave system in Mexico, My daughter was alive at that time, and there are definite moments where you're down there where you're like, should I really be doing this? and never more than when you're like, where somebody else, like a small child, is depending on you to remain alive. When you're single and ready to do whatever, I mean, every time you go down there is like, okay, well, shit, if I drown today, then I guess that's that, because nobody gives a shit. But and it's usually never that hairy. Cave diving is, there is a science to it. You plan your dive and you execute things perfectly. You have a lot of redundancies down there, and you go through the training of what to do in the event that you have some kind of equipment failure or anything else. And if you continue to plan that dive, then you'll survive it. It's really where things get really messed up in the caves is on exploratory caverns of which no one has entered, or you have some perfect storm of equipment failure of which you can't recover. Like you usually have 2 or 3 light sources at minimum, if not more than that, and you have a half a dozen ways to get air. Even if you have depending on what part fails, for all the way from regulator to hose to, all of those things have redundancies. And then you go down with other people too, who have those same redundancies. So in the event that your entire kit fails, that you can piggyback on somebody else's kit back to the top. And that's called the rule of thirds. So, there's a lot that goes into even being able to get into a cave. Really, the difference in Mexico, most of what we've done in Mexico is cavern diving. Cavern diving is different than cave diving. That's like the cenotes network that of caves that were built during an asteroid storm in the Yucatan, something like 20,000 years ago. That there was an ice age, and then and as things melted, those caves flooded with water, and so they're underwater now. So you can go in there and see things like fossilized birds' nests and things, so that it was above water at some point. And in the cavern, the difference between a cavern and a cave is that the cavern has natural light. So there'll be rooms and areas in there where there's like little columns that have been punched through, and a little bit of light will shine through, and it makes for a gorgeous diving experience.
That sounds incredible.
It's incredible because it's like a tower of light in some cases, and you could be in basically really low light or even total darkness, and you'll have these kind of beams of light. It looks really spectral and otherworldly. A cave is different. A cave is zero light, and usually has only one entrance and one exit, and that. And some cave systems or a lot of cave systems, even in the Yucatan, are completely unmapped and undiscovered today because nobody has survived some of that stuff. A lot of this is written about in a fascinating book by a guy named Sheikh Exley called "Caverns Measureless to Man." And Sheikh Exley ultimately is dead along with all of his friends. And a lot of them were trying to discover the cave system in the Yucatan at that time. And I think Sheikh Exley actually died on trying to break the depth record, the human depth record for dive, which I think now is at like damn near 1,600 feet. But I think he broke it he broke it and died something at 1,000 or 1,100 feet. 1,500 foot is an insane dive.
Sorry, the delay there. What's the deepest that you've gone?
I have done almost 200 feet.
That still seems like a long way.
Yeah, so you have to use different mixtures. I don't want to get too technical on this. You have to use different gas mixtures as you descend, because the partial pressures of gas. Of course, when you're breathing air, it's not just oxygen. There's a bunch of other gases that are in there. And as you decompress that air when you're downstairs, depending on the depth, you get different partial pressures of those gases in your bloodstream, and you have to manage that. So, and a lot of that math is done while you're downstairs. And now there's computers that do that on like rebreather tech machines, and they'll kind of do a lot of that stuff for you and analyze the gases that are in your in the air you're breathing out, and determine what mixture of gases that you need on your inhale, and run it as a totally automatic system. That's pretty complicated stuff. Traditionally, you got tanks, and you're like kind of turning tanks and doing the math on a little clipboard on your arm, and you're figuring out what mixture that you need to do in order to do the descent. So, but that's called trimix gas diving. That's the tech route. So at least in PADI, like when you're getting certified to dive in PADI, which is a diving regulatory institution that certifies divers, there's a couple of routes you can go. I went the tech route for tech diving. You could also go search and rescue. I got some friends that did search and rescue. I can't swim, so I didn't do, obviously, search and rescue. And surprisingly, you don't need to be a swimmer to dive. I sink really well. And when I say I sink really well, like in a saltwater dive, I will take like a saltwater open dive, which means just out in the open ocean. If we're doing like a 2-bar dive, like a 50-foot, I'll take no weight with me at all. So I can descend on, in an open water dive situation without a wetsuit. If you're diving in the Caribbean or something that's like 88 degrees, I won't take a suit and do a couple of tanks. In that situation, I might take 2 pounds with me, maybe. And in most situations, I'll take no weight at all. That I have friends of mine that's taking 20 pounds. So I can't. But the fact that they need to take that much weight, they're naturally really buoyant. That'll make them a good swimmer at the top of the surface. I can't swim for shit because I will not stay at the surface.
I've seen that in the Mediterranean. I've seen you not float.
Yeah, I can. For some reason, I can lay down at the bottom of a 10-foot pool.
It's got to be bone density.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say, but there's a lot of cavities in the body that create buoyancy. Bone density is I'm sure a contributor. But who knows? But diving ended up being something I went down the rabbit hole in after, not just open water, because all the life is really where the sun gets through, which is like the first 30 feet, 35 feet. After that, you start losing colors because the light just doesn't make it past that. After, 70, 80, 90 feet is when you start losing like your blues and your shorter wavelengths. And then after you get to, in some cases in the caves, or in some cases even past 100 foot, it's dark down there. So there's not a lot of fish. There's not a lot to see because fish the life isn't down there. If you want life, you go around like where there's coral and there's ecosystems and there's small fish, there's big fish, there's areas that you can go out and dive with. They've got all of that stuff and you can see all that wildlife. Tech diving for depth, you don't get any of that stuff. It is all up here. Like you don't get to see the cool stuff and the colors and all of that shit downstairs. You're diving and it is like a math equation in your head. You're like, okay, what depth am I trying to reach? And what's my dive plan? And where am I trying to go? And how am I going to get back to the surface? And so you're planning all of that out and you're timing each one of these stages because at that depth, you have quite a bit of off-gassing time. So, in some cases, spending 30 or 45 minutes at 15 feet on your ascent. You stop just to off-gas nitrogen. Yeah.
Wow.
So, and that's so, because nitrogen builds up in the bloodstream and you have to be able to off-gas that at some point before you go to the top. And then you get this, you get the bends, you get this nitrogen cavitation. So that is a big issue. And it can be fatal. So that's so you have to build the plan before you even get in the water. You build that plan and you dive the plan. And down there's not really a whole lot to see. There's a really interesting dive, about 130-foot dive, which is a fairly technical dive, but you could do it on enhanced a nitrox, which is a different nitrogen oxygen mix, and you can get like 8 minutes of bottom time at 120 feet with that mix. That is a cenote kind of down by Belize in Mexico, called Angelita. and it's a vertical column of water about 130 feet, and it kind of hockey sticks towards the bottom and goes down to about 175 feet. Now, what ended up happening is that at some point, some dinosaur fell into this thing and started to decompose. It filled up with water. Dinosaur was decomposing. And so what happened is that there's a sulfur layer that is around 100-foot depth at the bottom of this cenote. And there's trees and whatnot that were growing down there, obviously, before it flooded. That sulfur layer so it smells like rotten eggs down there, and you can smell it through your regulator when you're down there. And you can go through the sulfur layer. In it, it's like a total whiteout fog when you're in it. And there's very low light at that depth anyway. Even if it's like bright sunlight upstairs and you're down at that depth, you'll see very little color, and it is super dark. Then you descend past this sulfur layer. It is pitch black, and it hockey sticks down to where there's basically just shrubs and some wildlife that has been preserved in that state for thousands of years. The bottom of this, right above the sulfur layer, it exists down there like a lake of fog. And if you get a chance to Google it, you should Google the Angelita cenote at the bottom. There's been like photo competitions of people that have gone down there. It is a surreal place to be, and it is it's kind of like a different planet in a lot of ways. It is spooky. It's like a spooky haunted forest at 110 foot down in the middle of the Mexican forest as a vertical in the bottom of a 100-foot vertical column of water that exists because of the decomposition of some prehistoric animal that is rotting down there at the bottom of this cave. So that is that's probably the most interesting dive that I've done in that environment, just because there's something to see. A lot of the other caves and whatnot, especially in the Yucatan, some of those really sophisticated cave systems, you're in there and you're basically just like, stressing out the entire time. Like, I hope we know where we're going. Do I still have track of my line? Making sure that you're not touching anything. Anytime you touch anything, you could create a cloud of dust that creates really low visibility situations. So you have to make sure you're really in control of your buoyancy and that you're remaining as tight as possible and that you're not making any extra movements. You want to conserve as much oxygen as possible because that is your number one commodity down there. And then you got to make sure that your other dive buddies are in good shape. So you're kind of like hyper aware and hyper alert. And then there'll be, entrances that you have to get through where your body barely fits. And in some cases you have to take your tank off and pass it through an entrance and then swim behind it because you don't fit. That, you train yourself to do that sort of stuff, including on dry land. You train through some of that stuff. You're in that situation, and every part of your mind will tell you that, I really don't want to do this. And your body is like screaming to get the fuck out of this situation immediately. It is such a foreign environment for a person to be in. But it's like, that's, I think, the challenge I like about it, which is overcoming that anxiety and forcing your way through it, despite how much you literally inside are freaking the fuck out. It's one of those situations, like, the claustrophobia is so overwhelming that it's hard to even process, but that if you do anything, that it risks everything, because mistakes are binary in the cave. Any mistake that you make means that you're dead. So, there's no like, oh, I made a mistake and now, oh God, that was a close one. It's like you make a mistake, that's it. Nobody leaves. And it's fighting through that anxiety to continue to dive the plan and sticking to your training and knowing the rules of the dive. That is what keeps people safe in the cave and diving the caves, and overcoming that your body and mind's pure resistance that is screaming at you internally to get the fuck out as fast as possible. Because in some cases, all you want to do is just like race to the surface, which you can't do that for a lot of reasons. I mean, you could end up killing your dive buddies that way too. So, and so that's it's an extremely challenging sport in that sense. One of the most deadliest things to do, in fact, along with like wingsuit flying and some of this other stuff. So you got to be kind of really careful if you get into it, or really have some good reasons. I don't do it as much now because we got the 2 young kids, and to think that it is not uncommon for a dive master to take a tourist group into a cave system that he is not that familiar with, and no one comes out. That happens on more frequently than you would think.
What kind of fucking asshole are you as a tourist where you're going on a cave dive for the first time? I mean, that sounds insane.
There's a whole tourist economy around this, and there's some caves that are interesting, that are large, open kind of cave systems that where you get in, they're pretty scary, but that you take an open water diver, and if you're a dive master and you're looking for some business and you're in Mexico and you got a group of 5 people that say, hey, come take us to a cenote, and that there has been famous cases like this where a foreign dive master that doesn't know the cave system that well takes a tourist group down into one of these caves and nobody comes out. And
fuck.
They'll have signs at these cenotes that say that they don't go past this sign. There's 300 bodies past this sign. And, and then sometimes there's master divers that go back down there to recover the bodies, and sometimes they don't. But it's not unheard of for that stuff to happen, including in situations. Now, you get the right dive master. My dive master down in Cancun is a fucking boss. He used to film for National Geographic. He's a rebreather tech diver, and he knows the cave systems inside and out. And his confidence is inspiring because you get down there and you do want to freak out, but he's got a confidence about his understanding of the cave tech to where you're like, okay, if I'm with Juan, I know I'm going to make it through this one.
How do you feel that confidence down in the water or down in the cave?
Well, you got the classroom training for the dive before you go down there. This is what we're going to do. This is what it's going to look like. And then you follow one another single file, and you know the order and where you're going to go. So you build the confidence by having that plan, right? Feeling insecure about that or feeling questions about that is really it's such a good proxy for every stressful situation in life. If you're feeling nervous about anything or you feel anxiety, it's because you don't have a fucking plan. Once you have a plan, it adds certainty. Once you have that certainty, then you start seeing that it's possible. Then when you do it once, then it goes from possible to real. And then when it becomes real, then you know that it can be done again. So it's just like, any other thing that you try to venture into that's scary at first, like starting a business is similar. It's scary as fuck in the beginning. And you have, and the reason it's scary and the reason that you get freaked out and you have a bunch of anxiety is because you don't have a plan. Then the stronger your plan becomes, the more confidence that you get, then you start getting a little bit of a result. Then when you get the result, then you start seeing that it becomes real. It goes from being a possibility into your mind to becoming a real thing. And once that's overcome, then your anxiety disappears. So I think that's part of the confidence that you get from cave diving is that, hey, I can do that. And if I'm feeling fucked up about this and I'm feeling like, shit, this is scary or this is too much, go back to the plan. Let me rethink about the plan. Where can the plan be challenged, and what do I not know that's not giving me the confidence about how this is? That's a good introspection exercise when you're getting into some new venture that says, hey, I feel scared about this or I feel anxious about this. Some of that anxiety is healthy, but it is a good clue where your body hedonically is telling you that there's some unknowns in this situation that you're feeling uncomfortable about, because that is the root of anxiety, is the unknown about the future, right? And once you get that plan and you produce even a little bit of a result, then it goes back to like that Roger Bannister theory, that nobody thought that breaking the 4-minute mile was humanly possible until Bannister did it. And then there's 20 motherfuckers that did it in the next year and a half. Is once people saw it's possible, they're like, okay, well, now that it's possible, I can do it too. So, and I think that getting a little bit of a result, figuring out the plan, getting the confidence, going down there, or even if you're starting a business or doing any kind of venture, making the plan, getting a little bit of a result, now you know what's possible, and then it's just turning up the volume from that point. So I think that that's how you overcome the anxiety in that, and in business, and in so many other areas I used to have a big anxiety problem, and I didn't know how to deal with that. And I used to deal with it in pretty like destructive ways, like alcohol, and that really edges out anxiety. I mean, alcohol as a drug, really, and it really dulls anxiety.
Yeah.
But you know what else really dulls anxiety is getting clarity on a fucking plan. So if you're really clear on the plan and in how to and what to do, then in some ways the result of the plan even doesn't matter, because what the result is a presumption that you're making that you prefer one particular outcome over another. And that is a false statement to say that I'm going to feel this way if this happens, and I'm going to feel this way if this happens about an event in the future, is a total logical fallacy. That's like saying, you'd be better off if you got all of the things you ever wanted, which we all know is fucking false. Right. So there's no way. Yeah, there's no way to predict how you're going to feel about one particular outcome over another. This is actually shown true. There's a famous experiment done by Dan Gilbert that he wrote about in a book called Stumbling on Happiness. Fantastic book, where he measured, would you prefer becoming a lottery winner or becoming a paraplegic? And of course, people are going to say, hey, I'd prefer to win the lottery. No shit. But as it turns out, he tested people who have won the lottery and have become paraplegics, and they're equally satisfied with their lives, regardless of that outcome. So for you to say that, hey, I prefer one outcome over another, it's actually not true. It's just the prediction of how you think you will feel if one particular thing happens over another. And that's one of the things about anxiety, is that we anticipate how we're going to feel about the future, about future events. Turns out to be completely inaccurate. So I got a little bit off on a tangent about how you feel about one outcome or another. But what I was thinking about is that when you have the plan, the result of the plan matters a whole lot less than the confidence that the plan gives you in relieving the anxiety on the onset. Because I know that now that I have the plan, that gives me some direction of what to do, and whatever outcome that comes from that, that it's pointless for me to build an exercise of me having a feeling of one particular outcome over another. And I try, even though right now if my company were to grow to $100 million, and how I would feel about that versus if my company went bankrupt this year, how I would feel about that. I know that it is a logical trap for me to have a preference and to say that I'm going to feel this way about it. Could be that one turns out to be a huge disaster, and one turns out to be a blessing in disguise. And there's no way to really tell about how you're going to feel about future events. And that's not me. Don't take my word for it. It's all written. Dan Gilbert is sort of like the living scientist behind this, behind the neurological systems that are behind this, the happiness architecture in the brain. Mm-hmm. And And so I use that. That's kind of one of my favorite books. I use that, and I use the plan and focusing on the plan to overcome anxiety in the cave, because I think it's a fantastic analog to be able to take any challenge or any risk that's out there and know that you can overcome it, because you can, by sheer will, tell your mind and your body to shut the fuck up and stick to the plan, instead of trying to freak you out over unnecessarily focusing on the future, and then paralyzing your actions and seeking distractions like drugs and alcohol as a result.
Yeah.
So,
or video games or whatever it becomes.
or whatever.
I mean, this
yeah,
kind of points
that's another great distraction.
back to everything we were talking about presence, and just being, what you're describing is putting yourself in a situation where you're in the flow of life to just experience exactly what's happening around you by being ultra present. And I wanted to go back and ask you, how did you even get started in cave diving?
Yeah, so I had a friend, shout out to Matt Nethaway. I lived with him in Hong Kong for a couple of years. And when I moved back to Austin, well, we had been in Hong Kong, and we used to vacation in Thailand a lot. We spent a lot of time in Thailand. And we started just doing these casual open water dives, because sometimes we'd take a vacation out for like a week or two in some of these islands, fairly remote islands, and there would be a guy sometimes on the beach that's walking around with a half a dozen tanks that'd be, a dive master's just kind of peddling a service, just like, any food truck or masseuse that's out there on the beach. There's guys out there with dive tanks that are doing a beach dive as a service. And we're just sitting on the beach one day, and we decided to do a dive. And then after that, we just liked that experience so much that we both started to pursue diving further and further. And I moved back to Austin. He stayed in Hong Kong. So he continued in the search and rescue. He was a competitive swimmer. So he's a powerful swimmer above water. He went search and rescue. I had access to Mexico. That's where I would go diving, is in the Cancun. And in Cancun, of course, onshore diving, like in the cenotes, is the hot ticket over there. There's some great open water diving. You can dive with the whale sharks at Isla Mujeres. You can do some great open water diving in Mexico as well. But the real thing that everybody wants to go to the Yucatan for is diving the caves, diving the cenotes. And so we have access to that stuff. And I went down there to get my dive certification. I met this guy, Juan. Juan happened to be a cave diver. He took us, and Matt flew down, and we did a couple of dives, and I got my open water certification, and we did a couple of dives, and Juan was like, it was just me and Matt at this time, and Juan. And Juan had a small little dive shop in the middle of Cancun. And Juan was like, hey guys, you guys want to do something really interesting? We could go dive one of the caves or one of the cenotes. And we're like, had no clue what it was, right? And we didn't know what we were getting ourselves into, but him being a dive master was very confident. The three of us is what you need in order to go to a cave, is a system of threes. So the three of us were there. We were going to do a fairly basic cave, a lot of people, popular kind of place. But and it was more of a cenote, which is just it had a couple of ways in and a couple of ways out, but it did have overhead obstruction, but a lot of space to be able to move around, and it was a next level experience, which was, I had only dove open water by that time, and then getting into a scenario where it is near total darkness, overhead obstruction, where you just see people's flashlights kind of buzzing around in the distance of other divers that are down there. And it's really, there's very little wildlife that's down there that wants to live in that no light situation or low light situation. But it was just next level in the sense of, I felt safe and secure, but it felt like you're on like in another planet. And after that, we told Juan, hey, do you know some other caves that we could go to? And he was like, sure. So, and he was the one that told us the stories about, hey, you got to pick the right dive master, because some of these dive masters will just take you down to a watery grave, So, and he told us about his history and how he learned and how long he's been doing it. And so we got convinced that, hey, let's go to some more. So the next day, We just spent almost the entire day driving from cenote to cenote to dive some of these caves. And I have since then gone back about a dozen times to do several hundred tanks with Juan in those cenotes, and ended up getting advanced open water, then nitrox, then trimix, and then start the Cave Master program, which is a land-based program at first until you get to side mount and then rebreather tech. So side mount is where you carry the tanks actually at your hip, so you can take them off and go into really tight crevices downstairs. So you're not wearing the large BCD tank on your back to where you can't fit into certain tight spaces. And then, of course, rebreather tech, you can get into like really extreme dives that where you're literally underwater for hours and hours at a time. So that to really get to the end of that is a 5,000 tank journey. So in some cases, years and years and years of diving before you're really in a position to be able to go as a dive master with a rebreather tech and be able to take a couple of people down. Juan has done 24-hour dives, rebreather dives for National Geographic at 800 feet.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, I mean, the guy is a beast. And so we knew that we were in good hands. And then, all of that happened after the first few caves that we were in, and you get down there and you just get hooked on that, because then when you come back up, you feel such a foreign place. You feel so helpless, and you feel like, every part of your mind is just freaking out. And then you come back up to the top and you're like, man, that was a rush. Let's do it again. So, and so that's what that was like. It's a lot. It's just like skydiving in that sense. Some people do it and they're like, man, that was awesome. And you go further and further and further down the rabbit hole until you're flying wingsuits.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of what happened. And there's been some other caves that we've run into. There's the Blue Hole in the Bahamas. There's Jacob's Well in New Braunfels. There's some of those caves. Some of those are pretty damn dangerous places. I'm not at the point yet where there should be no cave diver that is looking to do a solo dive into a cave with a single ingress and egress with overhead obstruction. Basically, you're killing yourself at that point. Like suicide. It's a dumb way to do it. But, it's kind of one of those, anything that we want to explore now, you got to find your team of a couple of people that are going to go through. You have to have 3 people that do that in your whole kit ready to go. So, and those things don't kind of fall out of the sky. You know what I mean? So, I would love to do some more caves, even globally, because I've dove Mexico a lot now. Mm-hmm. And I think some of these other wells and other cave systems would be super interesting to do. And I'm glad that it reminds me of those kids in Thailand that were stuck in that cave when it flooded. Remember that there's like a soccer team that got stuck out there?
Yeah, of course.
Man, when those kids got stuck and I saw the cave map, I was like, nobody's making it out of there. That was my concern. And it took really one of the world's greatest cave divers to reach them. I mean, the guys that were like at the beginning when people were exploring caves, like guys who have been doing it for 30 years, like the world's greatest cave divers to even make it in. It's like a 12 or 13 hour dive to reach those kids in that cave.
That's incredible. How did they even get stuck? I forgot. How did they even get stuck in there?
They were on a hike. And they hiked in, and it rained, and it flooded in a matter of minutes, because it was inside of a mountain, and as it rains, basically all the rain that kind of pools and collects in this one cave. So millions of gallons just entered the cave in a very short amount of time. And so once you're in, and I think that they went in 3 or 3.5 miles.
Wow.
So once you're in and it floods in the matter of 20 or 30 minutes, you can't just run out of there. So, so they got stuck on an island that was kind of well into this cave. And people knew that they were in there because I think they all rode their bikes to the cave, and all their bikes are just sitting outside. So they're like, we know they're in there, And nobody had been able to reach them because, you know, you go in with a standard tank or whatnot, and you don't really get to too far. So you really need a rebreather apparatus to be able to penetrate the cave far enough. So I think that there was an effort by the cave diver who discovered them to say, hey, you know, I'm going to make it as far as my tech will allow me to go. And I think that in that process, he found them. And even after they were finding the challenge of them getting out, I was not optimistic because of the complexity of cave diving itself. And you have 20 kids that are over there that have never dove before. I was just like, there is simply no way to get them out.
That's
you know what
crazy.
I mean? And having cave, you know, there were other divers that were not surviving the process of just putting staging tanks in place, because, you know, part of the dive is that sometimes you have staging tanks at certain depths or certain distances. In this case, where you abandon the tanks that are empty and you take some new tanks and you use those to continue with your journey. And there's a well-trained cave diver who died doing that. So, you know, I think they came up with a fantastic solution to save those kids. Fantastic story, but you know, I feared for the worst when that happened. Just out of when I've been down there in the cave, thinking that anybody who's down there who's 10 years old, how the hell would you be able to manage that? You know,
Totally. That's just something that's universally incredible. I mean, that's fucking magic.
Yeah.
It's interesting how I'm reflecting on this right now. The universe gave you the challenge of learning the skill of cave diving to help you overcome some of the anxiety that you had as it literally gave you the tools and the guide in Mexico to go master this. And the fact that you brought it back to something really incredible, which is this applies to everything in life, is that your mind can just go in a direction that's uncontrollable sometimes. And it's up to you to be present and conscious and connected with yourself to stay in that moment.
Yeah. I never thought of it that way. But I should probably use that experience to serve me more in situations where I still get anxious, and use that, use that as sort of a weapon that says, hey, this is just like diving a cave. And if you could survive that, then how do you, because a lot of it is just creating the plan to dive and then making sure you dive the plan. That's the saying. So, because right now we're dealing with a whole different type of challenge, which is getting our company really scaling, which is doing well. But oftentimes, you you end up in that same boat. Are we going to make enough? Are we going to, what's our next step? Can we really fulfill the orders? All of these questions. And in reality, it just goes back to the same thing, man. If there's not enough clarity on the plan, and that's what's causing the question mark, and that question mark is leading to that anxiety. Then that anxiety is making you second guess yourself, and then eventually that goes down. You go down the wormhole and say, "Oh well, this is a fucking stupid idea. Anyway, I should just I gotta abandon ship or whatever." So you start freaking yourself out by overthinking it. But the reality, and it all starts with the fact that there's some hole in your plan, and possibly not having enough challengers review the plan and shoot holes in it to where you can see all the pitfalls that you weren't aware of. I think we could use more of that, Yeah,
well, it goes back to what you were saying around who you surround yourself with is extremely important. And what that came to my mind as well, what you were talking about, because I was like, man, who the fuck do you go down in a cave with where your life is on the line? And that's a great metaphor for life. Like, who are you going to move through life with to experience it to the fullest potential? Right.
Right. In the cave, you do that. The people
provides.
that you go down with, you depend on them for your survival, you know, and they do with you too, because if they have an equipment failure, you're carrying redundant equipment. They're carrying redundant equipment. And the rule of thirds is there's 3 of you. You're all carrying 2 redundant systems. So if any 2 people and you only go in to using a third of your oxygen. So if any 2 people have total failure, all 3 of you can get out on one person's gear all the way out. That's the rule of thirds. 3 people, 3 sets of gear, 1/3 of the oxygen. So you can get a third into the cave. 2 people experience total failure. 1 person can drag everybody out. And it's that scenario where everybody is depending on everyone else. In that scenario, like if I'm the guy that has a equipment failure, or if you're the guy that has equipment failure, we're making the bargain with one another that says, hey, I'm the one that's taking the responsibility. So you have to go down with somebody who has accepted that bargain, right? Who's taken that agreement with you. And I think that that's true in when it comes to other relationships that you have in life, is that those relationships in some way are a bargain that says, hey, I'm just like in marriage, right? I'm going to be here for you and you're going to be here for me. Right. And it's because of that we have the confidence to be able to enter into the unknown. And that is because you have tools that will carry me when I'm breaking down, and vice versa. And then if you build those systems that way, it produces success in the cave, and I think it produces success on land too. There's so many analogies to this that I never thought of on this diving situation. Man, I wonder if there's some caves in Hawaii.
I don't know.
That when we're down there, that we could get you in.
I'm interested. I feel like I just started meditating on how those principles apply to my life, even more.
Yeah. Have you skydived before?
Yeah. I actually did it with my wife.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
So this will be similar, because human beings are just as incapable in the water as they are in the air, as it turns out. Once you get in the water and as an open diver, and you get a little familiarity with that, we could do that in the matter of a couple of days.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm comfortable in water. I mean, I'm a pretty good. I don't sink in salt water. I'm a pretty good swimmer. And I'm comfortable. I mean, I think there's an element of fear that goes into. I mean, the ocean is fucking crazy, And I see stuff out here all the time on the beach that's like washed up, like a fish that just has a gnarly bite out of it, and you're like, oh, that guy got fucked.
Depending on where the currents are, you can't really fight that current in the ocean. You just got to drift dive it. But that'll all come in understanding open water diving, are pretty basic. There's some classroom investment, and then you have to do some preliminary tanks, and then you go through a couple of tests, and then when you pass that test, you'll get your open water certification. That's worth doing. I mean, you guys live in Hawaii. Yeah. That shit's worth doing, full stop.
For sure.
And Max is almost at the age where he could do it too. Your son, he's because I think you can get open water pretty young. Like I want to say 13, 14 years old, maybe even younger than that. You can become a diver, open water diver. He would love it.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's a whole different adventure down there. And from, like you mentioned, a practical education standpoint, there's math involved, right? You got to do math on how you plan your dive map and your depth, and understand the air and the oxygen and partial pressures of gases and all of that stuff, right? So there's something to learn in the dive process that is a good practical education as well. And in your case, there'll be a review of pre-algebra, but it's all useful. And if there's like other cave systems that are popular dive spots in Hawaii, we should do that stuff too.
For sure. I mean, I'm interested. I'm definitely interested.
Yeah. Well, we'll do some research for when when we make the trip down there, maybe we can get in the water.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, even just open water diving would be incredible.
Oh yeah, and I'm not sure where there is in Hawaii. We might have to take a day trip because a lot of times the real great dive locations are quite a ways out of like fishing and shipping channels. So you have to like maybe take a boat, in some cases 6, 8, 10 hours offshore, and then you dive for a couple of days, and then you take the boat back. Those types of dives, that's where you really get the once in a lifetime type of dive experiences where you see, all your big fish and your sharks and, like your giant mantas with 20-foot wingspans and shit like that. And in some cases, those dive locations take 8, 10, 12 hours or more to get to because in the fucking middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And
it's immersive, right?
Yeah. And then, but the boats are usually pretty nice boats, like a couple 100-foot type of like dive yachts where you have all the tanks and everything on board and everybody got a little stateroom that you're in. And it's a great like 3-day trip or 4-day trip. You go out there for a day, you dive a couple of tanks, and then everybody parties on the way home.
That sounds incredible, man.
Yeah, they're awesome.
Do we have to wait till December?
Yeah,
Probably.
for sure. In the Pacific is a great area to see some of that giant wildlife. We did a dive off of the Philippines. It was 24 hours out.
Wow.
And but you see everything great, from great white to giant manta, like giant mantas that are the fucking size of like a small airplane down there. And and just massive wildlife. None of that's, it's just all a lot of it is in the Pacific and these locations that are outside of popular shipping channels, and these dive tours that go out there, these kind of like really small exclusive dive tours that are out there. That stuff is, if you get a chance to do that, that is the way to do open water.
Yeah. Man, I'm interested, dude. That sounds like an incredible experience. I think I've got the mindset to kind of conquer those fears of being underwater.
And, we got one life, right? So it's a thing that you get to do. Diving is just, we've got exploration of the deep is just such a provocative thing for people, over the past century, all the way from not just, Jacques Cousteau, but James Cameron and some of these other guys that have invested a lot into exploration, underwater exploration. That and it's all fairly recent, from SCUBA actually is an acronym that stands for self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. But like recently, we've been exploring some new stuff like the trench, Marianas Trench, the deepest part of the ocean. James Cameron just did that with his ship, the Challenger Deep. So there's a particular fascination that humans have with exploring the unknown, and I think just very similar to space and what exists past the moon and exploration of space past the moon. I think that they're on Earth, terrestrial Earth. There are only really 3 areas that exist that have essentially been unexplored, and that is. A lot of the ocean floor is obviously one of them, but as a extension of that, the real network of caves that exist, really from the Ice Age, that are now completely submerged. The second is the Amazon, and the third is Sahara. I think that outside of that, every other part of terrestrial Earth is pretty much somebody has stepped foot on. So there's been this for the past few decades, just this provocative interest in exploring the ocean. And it's the pursuit of that has led to a lot of advancements in technology and a number of other things, just like space exploration and our development of like systems and materials and that can survive space. And that trickles down to everybody else. So, so it's an interesting sport in that sense. It's challenging. And I think you really feel like being a part of really like a group of like an exploratory group that get yourself into environments that very few people really get a chance to see or be in. And that's kind of cool. It's the way for us civilians and average Joes to kind of feel like astronauts in a way.
Yeah.
So man, I would highly recommend it. It's fun.
Yeah, I've got to look into getting. I think I should look into getting open water certified and what that takes. Now's like an incredible time to do it too, because
for sure
you can easily.
Yeah.
I know those places. I mean, right in this moment in time, it's probably not open, but in 2 weeks, knock on wood, when Hawaii lifts the quarantine again, I think things will be open. I feel like it's a great thing to do.
Yeah. And I would see if what the age limit is, and take your wife too, because you can have great open water dives. You can make it whatever you want. You can make it one of these super stressful kind of things when you're trying to get into new situations. You can go down there to see wildlife and fish. You can make it a sensual thing and just go with your wife and kind of like be kind of free underwater and just feel the weightlessness and be down there together. That stuff is super cool too. We dove the Caymans like that, just as like a free open water kind of, didn't care about anything, but it was just about like the two of us down there and the weightlessness of being underwater in this crystal clear the Cayman Islands. And so like you can kind of make the dive whatever kind of experience you want. So if your wife wants to do it, she should get involved too.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do some convincing for sure. That's gonna take her a minute. Although skydiving, she was in. She was.
Oh
like,
yeah.
She was. Well, there was like, when you go up in a plane with a bunch of random strangers, it's kind of a weird thing. You never know what you're gonna get. And I remember we had one of the cargo planes where you don't jump out of the side, you just drop out. You literally walk yourself off the back, which is a little bit fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
And I remember there was this girl. She was just, as soon as the plane took off from land, she was just crying like hysterically, and the guy, she was sitting on the end, and as soon as they opened the door, the guy just pulled her down and they dropped off, and she got to the ground and she was like, "That was awesome." I'm like, that was awesome. You were just crying the entire time.
Yeah, because your body and your mind are just like, why the fuck are we doing this? So, and did you just fight it?
Yeah, it was an incredible experience though. I really loved it. I would definitely be interested in going again on that front as well, because I think I really enjoyed the free dive part. I didn't so much enjoy spinning around because I got a little motion sick when the guy was like spinning around. But the free fall was, I don't know what else mimics that experience. But I think this is actually a great place to wrap up, and we've crossed the 2-hour mark. And
Let's do it. Yep.
I think you really put things in a different light in terms of how these things impact your awareness, right? How these things that you challenge yourself with impact your awareness. So I appreciate you sharing that experience from cave diving. And I appreciate
can I drop the plug for the company real quick?
100%. Where do people find you?
Yeah, so you can go to childsplayOakland.com. We focused a lot after the birth of our kids, we focus a lot on manufacturing and creating at-home learning products that are made from natural wood here in California to really enrich the lives of kids at home, particularly during the COVID crisis. So we do that in a number of clothing boxes, which is a sort of another recycled effort for us to be able to put clothes on the backs of kids due to the increasing costs of trying to do that as kids are growing up. So we have those products that are available on our website at childsplayOakland.com. We started this company a couple of years back. And so far, it's been going well, and it's really tied to the mission of trying to improve the quality of life for kids at home. So if you get a chance, check that out. Justin, thank you for your support. It's been great, wild journey, and we've just launched a couple of products on Etsy. We got some orders there to fulfill. So I'm kind of doing it all at this point, making all the way from making the content to get the orders up, put the Etsy store up, and now I got to run down to our fulfillment warehouse and get it packed up and ready and throw a shipping label on it to get it out the door. So I'm kind of like the jack of all trades. Me and Maggie run it from our operation. We just hired a couple of people, but we're optimistic about being able to grow this to something pretty significant.
That's beautiful, man. I appreciate the time again. This was great. I'm looking forward to doing it again. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Big thanks to AJ for spending the time. This was actually the second time we recorded. The first time we just had some crazy internet interruptions. I think they were probably caused by the wildfires in California. So I'm glad AJ's safe. I'm glad everybody's safe out there. And incredible conversation. Keep a lookout over the next few days for Dr. Jeff Rosenberg. The episode's coming out in a few days. And we've got some incredible shows coming up. So I appreciate you listening, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation.